picture was taken after sunset, way late in the day, above Flagstaff, north of Tucson. When he had the experience, it was early in the morning, you see. So the only explanation is that it was in the other dimension, not in this dimension. Because he was not there on this day. But the exact same thing occurred in another dimension that he experienced. And he talked about it, and then he saw the picture.
This is a very big event in the message.
Yes.
And we know that many churches around the world has been celebrating
it's a holiday.
The coming of this
that's when the picture was taken. It's okay.
On the February 18th. So many churches around the world has been celebrating.
It's a holiday.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Long for Truth. My name is Daniel Long. William Branham, responsible for what is known as the message cult, preached heavily against certain sins such as drinking, smoking, homosexuality, and other immoral acts. And yet, there were those within his inner circle that were regularly engaging in these very things. Joining me to talk about this today is my friend and my regular guest here on the channel, John Collins. John is the author of several books, including Preacher Behind the White Hoods and William Branham, 20th Century Charlatan. He's also the creator and curator of William Branham Historical Research, and he's the host of the YouTube channel Leaving the Message. John, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me again. This is great.
All right, so let's start by I think maybe just kind of telling us what you found.
So many things I've found, but before we get there, we've got to talk about the elephant in the room, right?
Yeah. So you have your
I've got Mahomes on.
Yeah. And I got Roethlisberger, although Roethlisberger is not the quarterback of the Steelers anymore. So we are, we are rivals, brother. We're rivals.
Absolutely.
But that's the elephant in the room. Now that it's out in the open, you're a Kansas City fan and I'm a Pittsburgh fan. We're still not enemies, man. We're still good friends, brothers in Christ, and we're out to just expose these lies of William Branham and others within the charismatic movement that have been influenced by William Branham. So let's talk about what you found.
So many things that Charles and I have been digging up and publishing on the podcast. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to it, but we, on the William Branham Historical Research site and on the Leaving the Message, we started a podcast, and we're basically starting way back in the beginning and just going through time. And my partner in this, Charles, has so much information that when combining his research with my research and putting it together, it's just opening up areas of research that I did not even know existed, right? Mm. And he's got everything from audio recordings to video to papers and interviews with people who were actually in some of the early churches before they became, the message and whatnot. But one of the key pieces of research that I get asked all of the time was William Branham homosexual? And to date, I've not answered this question, and on this podcast, I know you're wanting me to say my opinion, which I won't, but we do have quite a bit of research in that area because there were things that my family knew, and there were things that those in William Branham's inner circle knew that are just simply never talked about, right? And one of the key facts, there's a couple names that we'll be mentioning in the podcast that people in the message will be familiar with, but people who were never influenced by this probably have never heard of these names. But the two biggest ones, which I'll mention right from the beginning, is Leo Mercer and Goad. Mm. If you take this and compare it to the ancient world in the Bible days, you had the prophets and you had the priests. You also had the scribes, and the scribes are the people that are literally responsible for keeping what we have and call the Bible today. They're the keepers of God's word. When the Message, the equivalent to scribes were Gene Goad and Leo Mercer. They're the ones who were recording, selling, distributing, marketing William Branham's recordings. They're literally the reason why there is a message cult today. And according to my family and according to all of the people that I knew who were in the inner circle, everyone knew that these two men were homosexual. And we have recording, which I'll share with you, and you can put in the video if you want, but we have recording of ministers who are blatantly honest and admitting that William Branham himself knew that they were homosexual when he hired them.
I believe it was about 1956 and no later that Leo Mercer and Gene Goad, God told Brother Branham to hire them, two homosexuals. So I want you to get the drift of what I'm saying. This, what I'm talking about here, where God made himself known, and through a prophet, is where men turned back and the homosexuals were standing right there to take over.
And this is really key to understanding the topic that you asked me to come onto the show for, which we're talking about the cloud. You have to first understand that William Branham is working with men that are definitely homosexual. Everybody knew that they were homosexual, to understanding the bigger picture behind this photograph of a cloud that you see in every single Message church and a lot of William Branham's biographies. You'll see the cloud. You'll see people, if you do a search online for William Branham and cloud, you'll find people praying to this cloud. So it's a really big deal what we're about to talk about.
So before we get on to the topic of the cloud, there's a few names that I think need to be mentioned, and I'll get you to describe who these men were. So let's first of all talk about Lee Vale. Who was Lee Vale?
Lee Vale was one of William Branham's publicists, one of his partners, close friends. William Branham called him Dr. Lee Vale, even though I don't believe Lee Vale had a doctorate or any sort of degree similar. But a lot of the later books and publications were written by Lee Vale. And Lee Vale was involved in the strategy of, creating the Message mythology. We actually have private recordings of William Branham to Lee Vale telling him, if you'll plant this notion in the minds of the people, I'll follow up with this other notion. And so the two worked very closely together. So he was a very key figure in the Message.
Is he the one that William Branham wrote a kind of a secret letter or something to that gave?
Right.
Okay.
Right. That's the recording that I'm referring to.
Okay.
William Branham. It's interesting too, because when you listen to it, his voice in some of his private writings aren't as Kentucky hillbilly-ish as he claimed to be.
Yeah, you had actually mentioned that in some of your videos that when you kind of were looking in the earlier days at some of the earlier research, he didn't seem as Kentucky in his speaking with other people privately and things like that. So, all right, so Lee Vale, and then we have two other names I'd like you to talk about really quickly that is also going to be responsible or at least key in this cloud story. And that's right. James Ayers and Ted Kipperman. Right.
There's so many names, and I don't want to confuse the listeners because I think we're going to, at first, we're going to scatter out into all of these different areas of research. But at the end, if you stay tuned, we're going to bring it all back in. There is another iconic image of William Branham with, it looks like he's got a halo above his head.
Yeah.
And this was taken in the Sam Houston Coliseum. And like any Coliseum out there or any auditorium, you're going to have stage lighting, right?
Yeah.
And so these two men went to a very public debate between William Branham and F.F. Bosworth and a Reverend Best. Best was challenging these guys on, the early start of the charismatic movement. Basically, he's saying that yes, I believe in divine healing. Yes, I believe God heals, but no, I do not believe in these stage acts where people are coming to you guys as mediators between God and man. This isn't right. So that was his premise, and they held this very public debate. There were two photographers working for Douglas Studios, which was owned, I believe, by Ted Kipperman. They took the photograph of William Branham standing in front of the stage lighting. And in the original photograph, not the one that the cult has doctored, you can actually see men sitting in the background of the photo. And, they're not looking as though there's anything unusual going on. So they capture the photograph. Ted Kipperman actually sends it to Washington to copyright it. And William Branham used it in the cult mythology and the folklore, claiming that God would only allow this one single photograph to be published, and the FBI themselves, the head of the FBI, deemed that it was a supernatural photograph, and it basically entered into his biography as though God actually came down on the platform with him, which, if you know the rest of the story, it really isn't true.
All right, so we got these two guys here, James and Ted. So they are going to be important in the story. So let's start from the beginning. The cloud is, like you said, it's held as like this great, kind of like an icon or an idol within the message movement.
Many churches around the world has been celebrating.
Oh, it's a holiday.
So just kind of tell the story about the cloud. What exactly is the cloud? Why do these people worship the cloud? And then we'll move on as far as the details go.
Okay. Cloud is a very funny story if you think about all of the various pieces of information that we have collected that are associated with the cloud. Things that you just would never even think of. You really can't make up this story. It's the truth is stranger than fiction. William Branham went on several safaris and hunting trips and excursions, and he would often tell his church followers and people in the revivals that God had told him to go on this location, and he was going out alone to pray in the wilderness like they did in the Bible. Please give me your money to help fund this vacation for me.
Wow.
And yeah, it's really crazy. We have actually, Charles and I have dug up early newspaper articles, and dating back into, it's either the late 30s or early 40s, he had been all over the United States on these safaris, and he had actually captured a live wolf. I believe it was from Butte, Montana, and took it back to his house, which is a huge undertaking. How do you do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he, all through his ministry, even dating back into the early 30s and late 40s, he's taking these excursions.
Let me ask you this question. So you said that he was collecting money from his congregation to go to these places where God told him to go, but he was actually using it for hunting trips. Did anyone know that he was a hunter like that? You have pictures on your website of him with big game animals. I believe there's a picture of him with his son in a room with a bunch of guns and things like that. Did anybody other than those in his inner circle know about his hunting excursions?
They did. I have actually spoken with William Branham's first assistant pastor in the early Billy Branham Pentecostal Tabernacle, son. Talked to the son, and they did not stay in the message cult. They left quite early early in his ministry, and the son told me the primary reason why they left is because William Branham would go on these hunting trips. And remember, this is in Jeffersonville, Ohio, in the Ohio River Valley,
Mm-hmm.
right after the Ohio River flood had just decimated the entire city and surrounding area. And So he had a very large number of very poor people in his church. Some of them had lost everything they owned. And William Branham was, even though he says, I never took an offering, I never, collected money, etc., he still took free will donations, and the people gave him a lot of free will donations.
Yeah.
So as they're giving him this money, he's taking the money, and instead of helping the poor in his church like he should have done, he's going on these fancy hunting trips, and he has several trophies. Again, dating back to the early 1940s. Whenever he became the central figure of the cult, he was also taking hunting trips, and he was very public about it, right? He would mention it on recording, and the tapes were sold, so people were aware he's going on these things. But he always injected these notions that it was divinely inspired, that he was not just hunting, but he was going out in the wilderness to be alone with God and receive God's message to give to the people, or some such fabrication.
Gotcha. So let's so in this one particular day where he supposedly saw the cloud, he was on a hunting trip hunting javelina hogs.
Actually, no, and that's where the story gets really interesting.
Oh, okay.
The actual cloud occurred February 28th, 1963, and hunting season was not until it was March 1st through 10th, if I remember correctly, according to the 1963 javelina dates. He's going to go hunting, but there's another event for this halo photograph connected story that we'll get into that really places question on him even being in the state at the time that this alleged cloud event happened. The background to the story is that he told his congregants and his followers and the revivalists that God was going to send him a message, and he had a vision of 5 angels, and he's very clear that it's 5. He says it's 5 because it represents grace, GRACE, 5. And so he's going out to meet with these 5 angels to give him a word from the Lord. And it isn't actually until he comes back to Jeffersonville, and I think there's 10 or 11 sermons later, somebody hands him a copy of a magazine that has this cloud in it. And he says, oh, yes, I was there. I was standing right under this thing. And that's actually not a cloud, folks. You're looking at a photograph of 7 angels. So he added 2 angels. You're looking at a photograph of 7 angels that came down and gave me the mystery that was sealed by the 7 seals in the book of Revelation.
What was the cloud? What exactly was it? Was it this mysterious cloud, or was it something else?
Yeah, so the real history behind where he was and what was going on is so fascinating to me. I'm a history buff, if you can't tell it. First, let's give the background of what actually was the cloud, because similar to the photograph of his halo, there's much more to the story than the picture details. I've shared with you, and you can publish in the video if you want, the cloud photograph that was captured that made all the newspapers is the photograph of one single cloud ring. Mm-hmm. And one of the photographs that was captured shows a second cloud ring behind the bigger ring. And it was unknown to the people at that time. But this was, remember, during the communist scare, President Kennedy and the former presidents before him were trying to build up a missile defense system to counter Russia's imminent invasion. And so there were years of just, defense development. And then there were several months in a row of missile testing, missile development for the national defense system. And many of those records have now been declassified. But on February 28th, 1963, we actually have on my website, we have a declassified Vandenberg Air Force Base document that says they fired a missile and they fired an intercept.
I hold in my hand another set of declassified documents now available through the Freedom of Information Act. Like William Branham's quote-unquote halo photograph, these government documents prove William Branham's mystery cloud to be a complete hoax. These documents also confirm the letters mentioned in Brian Small's book, Investigating William Branham, The Unfolding Story of Plagiarism and Errors. Not only is it in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, these are declassified operations fully detailed by the United States Air Force. While testing the missile defense system, missiles were launched to intercept and to detonate other missiles entering the stratosphere. This explains the multiple clouds, not one, that floated from Vandenberg Air Force Base across the Arizona skies. It also confirms the findings of James McDonald, the scientist that William Branham mentioned. Cult leaders are very eager to share McDonald's initial discovery, but they withhold his final report from cult members.
And something went wrong. They ended up having to detonate both. So the big one, the attack missile exploded, and then the intercept missile also detonated. So they caused 2 cloud rings from Vandenberg Air Force Base that just floated across the northern Arizona skies. And these 2 rings actually floated across the state. I think it's like over 300 kilometers north of where William Branham claimed to have been hunting. And even the location that he gives of his hunting trip in these many tales is different than the location that his witnesses who were with him describe him being. They, every aspect of the story is different. It's almost clear he's not in the state. It's very clear that Vandenberg Air Force Base detonated these missiles that caused these 2 cloud rings. He is claiming 5 angels. He changed it to 7, and he changes his location, and he changes the timeline of his hunting trip to say, I went back to Arizona to hunt. I was standing under this cloud, and these were 7 angels, and I watched them lift up and go into the sky above me. And to the person who was never indoctrinated in this, right now they're asking themselves, well, how on earth did you believe this? It's such a far-fetched tale in the first place. I was born and raised to believe this, man. For 37 years of my life, I was trained to believe that this actually happened, and that all of these witnesses to this event had actually went back and verified the things that they're saying, and was just completely shocked to learn that no, this is just as it seems. This is quite fictional.
Yeah. So when you found out about it, that when you started doing the digging and you started looking at the evidence, and you found out that William Branham wasn't actually there, there's another interesting twist to this story. Where exactly was William Branham when he says he was supposed to be there in Arizona, but he was actually in Texas, I believe, correct?
Yes.
So
we don't know that he was in Texas on the day of the Vandenberg detonations, but we do know that he was at least headed there. And we do know that the trip that he explains himself being under this cloud came much later, came after he was in Texas. So he would have had to have gone to Texas and then back, and then claimed to have been standing under this thing on a date that it didn't happen. But remember, I said we would bring all of these strange pieces of the puzzle together. The 2 men that you mentioned early, Theodore Kipperman, James Ayers, they were the photographers who captured his halo photograph. So they captured the photograph. William Branham had Gordon Lindsay hire he's a private investigator. Basically, he's a person who examines documents and verifies their authenticity. In other words, was this a real photo or was this a doctored photo? And they took the halo photograph to this man. His name was George J. Lacey, and you can read him about him on my website, to verify that it was actually a captured photograph. And then William Branham begins making several boisterous false claims about the halo photograph. He says that Lacey was the head of the FBI, which isn't true. He said that he documented that it was a supernatural photograph, the world's first supernatural photograph, which wasn't true. Branham then claims that Lacey rushed it to Washington, D.C. in order to tell the government, hey, look, the supernatural God has just came down into William Branham's meetings, and we have a photograph of this divine being. And Washington, D.C. put it into what William Branham called the Religious Hall of Art, which is a fictional place that does not exist. And he proceeds to say that everyone saw it, which isn't true. And he proceeds to say that it was the only photograph in the entire set of photographs in the building that God permitted to develop, which also isn't true. And I'll share with you a photograph that actually did develop in the meeting. So Theodore Kipperman, James Ayers, the two photographers, are the ones who took the photograph, and they are aware that this whole story was bogus. So they actually had something on William Branham. And where it ties together with this cloud event is their nephew was on death row for killing a person.
So what are the details behind that story?
So remember, this is very unusual that William Branham would leave this hunting trip, right? He's told his entire congregation and all of his faith healing revival friends that he's going out there to receive something from God, and then decides that it's more important to go to Houston, Texas to this murder trial than to receive the word from God, which is really odd if you think about it. So I started digging into first these two photographers to see what kind of guys they are, and second, what happened, what would inspire him to leave. And I found out that Theodore Kipperman and James Ayers were actually counterfeiters. I've got a court document for their appeal, and their appeal was denied. James Ayers was convicted apparently of counterfeiting with the help of his partner Theodore Kipperman, Ted Kipperman. And their nephew, it turns out he was, back then, the world did not understand transsexual. So they called him a homosexual cross-dresser, which is basically he is a transsexual, and he later changes his gender to a female. He was also a prostitute, and with his prostitute partner, Caroline Lima, and the guy's name is Leslie Douglas Ashley, before he changed to a female, had a 3-day, there's no nice way to say this, they had a 3-day sex orgy with a gentleman in Houston, and during the process of the act, they shot him and killed him. And I'm going to be blatantly honest with you, it is career suicide for a minister of William Branham's standing to leave his hunting trip to receive the word of the Lord to go try to save this, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. So, why then? What was it that made him go to Texas to help this guy, Leslie Douglas Ashley, this guy who was on death row? What would have caused him to do that? Did it have something to do with the halo photograph?
It's really hard to say without being able to interview those involved. I do know that Theodore Kipperman is the one who copyrighted the photograph. And the reason it was sent to Washington, D.C. was legitimate. He wanted copyright protection on his photograph of William Branham's halo, which probably gave him distribution rights. And, he probably... I found one Voice of Healing article that said William Branham's biography was being published, and they're apologizing to the people who had paid, who had ordered this biography, because the photograph that went on the cover was of the halo, and it got held up because Ted Kipperman had a copyright. And there's apparently some dispute, and to the monetary, the financial aspects of how this photograph would be published. So I do know that Ted Kipperman held the photograph copyright, and they also knew, that this was stage lighting. They were there to see the men behind that it later got erased in this photograph. They could see that nobody's looking up at this thing. They're just, one guy I think is just staring at the ground. Even he's not even paying attention to the sermon, which is odd. So they would be the only ones that knew. They actually had something over him. So my gut says that they said, "Hey, we're going to expose your Halo story if you don't come save this guy."
But there's actually, like you said, no evidence of that. No concrete evidence of that.
No.
All right. Well, so then this whole cloud story that William Branham told was to avert him from being in, away from being in Texas, helping Leslie Douglas Ashley. Then that's what that's what's going on. So what then happened? What was the result of him being there? Did that help the situation?
Well, here's where it gets really odd. William Branham often referred to Leslie Douglas Ashley. He would call him that boy. I saved that boy down in Texas.
I was going hunting with a friend, not knowing what was going to happen. And someone called me, the one that criticized me about that picture of the angel of the Lord, the one that took it. I had to go to Houston about his son, or he's going into death row, he's going to be killed in a few days. He met me there and threw his arms around me and said, "Think the very man that I criticized comes to save my only son." The Humane Society give me what they call an Oscar, or whatever you want to call it, for saving a life.
And he said basically in one particular statement, he says that the Humane Society, which is a protection of animals, the Humane Society gave me an Oscar, which, if you know, is the award you get for, in Hollywood for your acting. Said the Humane Society gave me an Oscar for saving that boy from the electric chair. And it's just so really odd because the boy was a transsexual who thought himself to be a woman and later converted to a woman. And he never actually mentions the girl in the story who is also on death row. Both are to be executed. There is a stay of execution granted after William Branham comes. So the story gets so unusual. He leaves his hunting trip where God's supposed to be giving him this divine message through these 5 angels. He comes to Houston, Texas, and they petition for the stay of execution for both people. William Branham never mentions the girl. And they actually get the stay of execution granted due to an insanity plea. And William Branham claims that he's the one responsible for the stay of execution. Although, now that I'm looking at the documents, it appears there were 2 factors that I can see used. The newspaper said that this Leslie Douglas Ashley was insane because he was claiming to be Elijah, which William Branham also claimed to be Elijah. So it gets really weird there. And also at the same time, remember, this is in the early 60s. Back then, the world did not understand, even, have good studies on what is a transsexual. They knew that he was homosexual. They knew that he was dressing as a female. And so that contributed to the stay of execution because he was transsexual. And it really had nothing to do with William Branham's speech or anything divinely sent by God to stay this execution, as Branham claimed. It's just really odd. And there are some other key figures who were at this stay of execution, which are, when you recognize who it is, it's very interesting.
Yeah, you sent me some audio tapes, and there was one man that was mentioned there at the stay of execution that I am sure that anyone listening or watching this video or listening to this podcast is going to know who that man was. You want to
Yes.
you want to say who it was, or should we wait and just, folks? We'll tell you at the end. So watch all the way to the end. No, I'm joking. But
well, let's just keep hinting that we're going to tell who this is. You know, it's really odd because I listened to those audio tapes several times before I sent them to you, and here is a man who is a woman who is with his prostitute partner, who killed a man during prostitution, who had this group of Pentecostal revivalists come to help save him from execution, and just totally ignored the girl. You know, the girl doesn't matter. It's just the transsexual that matters.
Yeah. That doesn't make any sense. And so okay, this guy that, and I'm just going to call him a guy because it's really, you know, you can't change the essence of a person. So this guy, Leslie Douglas Ashley, has I read another document you sent me about his conversion story. So
yes,
he mentions, at least from what I listened to in the audio version of it, he mentioned a minister that came to him to visit, and I'm assuming that it's William Branham because he does mention the other very famous guy later on.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming the first minister was William Branham. And then he talks about how he saw these visions of the cross outside of his window, and his cell window in jail on death row there. And he you know, Jesus came to him and gave him the gospel, and then he opened up the Bible and read just all this stuff. And then later on in life, he just abandons all that.
Yeah.
And ends up going through with the whole operation.
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, after studying everything that is related to this story, I think there was a lot more going on behind the scenes than even what we realize. Charles and I, if you've listened to our podcast on the Leaving the Message YouTube channel, we have uncovered some just unbelievable information. And you have to pause and think, how much did Ted Kipperman and James Ayers know about William Branham, right? It really looks like, from the information that we've collected, it really looks like William Branham entered the ministry to avoid criminal prosecution. And we just released some of that evidence recently in the podcast. So if this were the case, it depends on the level of criminal that he was connected to. His dad was connected to Al Capone through a person named Otto Wathen. William Branham and his father were producing liquor for Al Capone. So the criminal ties could be significant. And if Kipperman and Ayers were not just 2-bit counterfeiters, like if this was a real big counterfeit operation, this could have been deeply connected to crime. So that's one aspect of the story. But when you listen to that audio recording that I gave you, Ashley is talking about his conversion to Christ. And, you know, for this type of Christianity, homosexuality is almost an unpardonable sin. They are very unforgiving of homosexuals. They're even less forgiving of transsexuals. And Ashley continued being homosexual and actually transsexual through the rest of his life. He converted to Leslie Perez and ran for political office and actually almost won in the state of Texas, which is odd. Strong supporter of Bill Clinton in the Democratic Party. Everything that these hardcore fundamentalists are against, Ashley remains for the rest of his and then her life. So when you listen to the recording, it's odd because the first section of the recording sounds very rehearsed, very forced. I listened to it several times and I can actually hear cars in the background. I can hear the engines coming and then leaving. So they're actually standing on a street corner at a stoplight while this is recording. Then, about 3/4 of the way through or so, the recording is edited and it sounds very unrehearsed. And then there's another section that's spliced on after that that's even worse unrehearsed and actually sounds very disgruntled that he's having to say it, all of which are on a street corner.
Wow.
So you've got all of these Pentecostal holiness fundamentalist men who are gathered with William Branham, a big name, which I'm going to drop here in a minute, who realize that this is career suicide. So now we have to force this guy to pretend like this was inspired by God and he's converted, which he was not. From all signs that I can see, I don't see any conversion, any actual conversion story. It looks like he stayed with the story long enough to appease the Pentecostal gods and then just totally abandon it later in life. And along with William Branham at this event for this day of execution, Ashley mentions another name, and that name is John Osteen.
Wow. Yes, I know. That shocked me. I mean, that really did. Yeah, you know, when I first heard that, and he mentions him several times, I was like, whoa, wow. Like, Osteen was even involved in this whole thing. Not too many people know about that, that's for sure. So, John, you've got all of these, you've got these different stage personas of William Branham. All right. You've got several different stage personas, and there's a lot of conflicting stories, like you mentioned earlier, the 5 angels and then the 7 angels. And also there's a lot of hypocrisy going on too, because William Branham preached against alcohol and against homosexuality. And yet you had him there in Texas rescuing a homosexual, and he didn't want anybody to know he was doing that. And so he puts himself there at the Cloud event. So it's like, what in the world?
It's really unbelievable if you think about it. I mean, growing up in this cult of personality, these were men that I just really respected, and everything, whenever he said that it was inspired by God, I pictured angels, invisible angels coming down and surrounding the events that were transpiring. I never pictured a transsexual prostitute being part of this story. It just blew my mind. And the hypocrisy, man, you've got, I'm going to share this video clip with you. This actually just hit my website, I think it was 2 days ago. When I was researching the 2 men we mentioned earlier, Gene Goad, Leo Mercer, these are the 2 men that were the scribes of the message. And the video clip of quote unquote, Dr. Lee Vale, he mentions another name that many people are familiar with in the history of these, the New Apostolic Reformation, etc., shepherding movement, Ern Baxter, who toured with William Branham for, from 47, I think it was, to 1953. Another name I thought was one of God's generals, a hero in all of this. Well, Lee Vale says that Ern Baxter was drunk, and whenever he would go to, like when William Branham went to India, Branham had this failed India prophecy that he said, thus saith the Lord, when I land in India, back home, you're going to hear of tens of thousands times 10,000s being saved, which did not happen. It was failed.
Right.
William Branham comes back to the United States, and he claims that God failed because his travel itinerary was messed up.
And when I had been very much constrained to go to India, and yet, as many of you might know, the Indian trip wasn't the success that it should have been, because I failed to follow the leading of the Holy Spirit and never recognized it after He gave me a vision to go to Africa first and then to India. And some of the brethren said, we can't get Africa together, so Brother Roberts has just been down there, so take off to India. And under the influence of my brethren, maybe taught, but no matter what someone influences you, if God has told you something different, and now judge it by the Word. See? By the Word. And then go. You know, we're not supposed as prophets together, we are to help one another, but never tell one another what to do.
Yeah.
But Lee Vale says no. When they landed in India, Ern Baxter was so drunk that when he got off the plane, he was doing the goose step. And he was, according to Lee Vale, Ern Baxter was a womanizer.
When Brother Branham went to India, he took with him some people. And I believe unknown to Brother Branham was one man. I'm not sure that Duplessis got him there or Ern Baxter. And I'm going to speak very plainly, and I've said it before, and I'm not the least alarmed to say it because it's the truth. Baxter was a womanizer. He even got drunk on the plane and came off doing a goose step and everybody laughing at him.
And started hitting on the Indian women to the extent that the leaders there in India actually approached the campaign party and says, is it right for Ern Baxter to be with all of these women? So there was even more going on in William Branham's campaigns than met the eye. And yet here are these godly men who are coming to save the transvestite and ignoring, they called it transvestite back then, they're ignoring the girl in the story.
Yep.
Who, why did God not care about the girl? Why did God only care about the transsexual who was related to the guys who took the photograph of the halo?
Yeah, and I'm sure you were asking yourself that question as you were investigating this whole incident when you were still, when you were thinking about in the early days when you were thinking about leaving the message.
Yeah,
so
it's a big deal.
Yeah, so in that audio or video clip of Lee Vale that you sent me, he also mentions another guy that was a that was a homosexual that was part of the Christian Businessmen Association, and that's when I think he actually mentioned there were other people within the party that William Branham hired that were homosexuals. Now, did William Branham know that these men were engaged in that lifestyle?
Not only did he know, according to the people that I know personally who were in these meetings, these men were not, this was back during an era when there was a lot of closet homosexuals that did not make it public, because back then, in some states, the people would actually string you up, hang you for it. These two men, I guess using the shelter of William Branham's fame, were very open. It was very evident that they were homosexual. They talked, they acted very homosexual. William Branham himself, it's really odd because I've got a photograph of my grandfather and William Branham I'll share with you. During this time, William Branham actually was accused of being homosexual himself. He mentions it on recording. And rather than avoid the appearance of evil, William Branham himself held men in unnatural ways. Like he's holding my grandfather with his elbow cupped around my grandfather's elbow. It's really, really weird. A normal person not indoctrinated in this cult theology would go, yeah, those two men are gay. There's no question. I can't say that because it's more complex than you would understand in the real world, because my grandfather was also under the mind control of being in a cult.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
I could go
Absolutely.
either way. Was he gay? Was he not? I don't know. But I will say that, that it's very odd that William Branham himself would conduct himself that way. The man you're mentioning is Frere von Blomberg, I think is the way it's pronounced.
I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he was openly homosexual, at least within the, Lee Vale even mentions it, within the campaign management team. He was hitting on men while William Branham was touring with him and working closely with him. So William Branham knew. There's no way he did not know. And yet he's supporting the transsexual and he's ignoring the girl and I don't think he ever even mentioned the girl being saved from execution, and she was part of this.
Yeah, and I think she ended up not going to the death penalty anyway. I think from what I'm looking at the tape, she got like 5 years. And I think, I don't know if she served the whole 5 years. There was talk about her actually getting 3 years taken off for the time she'd already spent in jail. So I don't know what the story is behind that, but she did not die in the electric chair either.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's kind of funny. So if you think about the conversion story, right? So they try to save this man, William Branham and John Osteen, hand in hand. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. John Osteen was in the Message. He was in the latter rain version of the Message.
You and I think our first video that you and I did together, or maybe it was the second one, I can't remember. We were doing one on the Jim Jones story, and you I don't know if you sent me an audio, but anyway, I have an audio recording of William Branham, right there, mentioning John Osteen in one of his church services or revival services.
Yeah. So these men were there, right? And they, quote unquote, saved Ashley and what appears to be a forced conversion and recorded it so they could sell it, whatever they did. I don't know. But they, quote unquote, saved him. They did get a stay of execution. That was in, I think it was either March or early April of 1963. There was a stay of execution. Ashley gets put in a minimum security facility, and to show how much he was not converted, he escaped from the facility. He made the FBI's most wanted list and escaped into, I think it was Georgia, where they finally caught him. He was hiding out as a clown in a carnival, and the FBI were, somewhere I've got the article, the FBI were looking for a man dressed as a woman who talks and acts like a combination of a man and a woman, who's carrying a Bible and pretending to be saved. That was the description of the FBI's most wanted, for Leslie Douglas Ashley.
So let's talk about the insanity plea really quickly and kind of bring it all together here. So he claims to be, not just William Branham, but Leslie Ashley Douglas also claims to be the prophet Elijah.
Yeah.
So is that something that was influenced by William Branham?
That's interesting because there weren't a lot of religions that I can find in those years where there was an Elijah prophet. I know Jim Jones also pretended to be the return of Elijah. William Branham did. And I can find these Elijah prophets before, and I can find some of them after, but I can't find any during this period of time in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. It also looks as though William Branham may have been involved prior to the stay of execution. On my website, and I'll share with you, we've got a document of the Ashley Ayers Evangelistic Association, which was established after the murder. So it looks as though there was some planning in this claim, in this Elijah claim. But I don't see any evidence of this, coming from anywhere else. Where this is a person who is a prostitute, who is a transsexual, who cares nothing about religion, nothing.
Right. Yeah.
Why would he pose as Elijah if he did not care about religion?
Exactly. What an interesting and crazy, and the more you dig, John, the crazier it seems to get. I'm not joking. I watch your podcast with you and Charles, and it just seems like, the more you dig, the more you find. And it's just like there's this never-ending web of just lies and hypocrisy throughout this whole movement.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. The truth is stranger than fiction. And this is one of the wackiest stories that we found. But I'll be honest with you, some of the things that we haven't talked about yet on the podcast make this look pretty tame.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. so folks, this is the thing. This is the story. The whole reason that William Branham made himself there at this divine event that took place with a cloud is to cover his tracks. So that's just incredible, John. Well, John, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You and I have done several videos together, and I'll add this to the playlist that I have of us on my channel. And we'll just keep doing these things, because the more information comes out, and the more that people know, the better it is for them. And hopefully, the truth will just continue to be exposed.
Yeah, this is amazing research, and the conversations that we have. I'm getting a lot of feedback. We're actually seeing an implosion in the cult following William Branham, especially in Africa. People in Africa are learning that William Branham was racist. He was against people with black skin, and there are just so many people exiting. And largely, a lot of them, even recently, have told me that it was because of the podcast that you and I are doing. That's just beautiful. I am so thankful. Well, John, thanks so much. We'll be doing it again. Maybe the next time we'll talk about something you just discovered that we've never heard or seen before. Who knows? But usually you and I come on about once a month, so we'll continue to just reveal these lies and hypocrisy that this cult has conjured up. So, John, thank you, buddy. I appreciate you being here. Thanks for having me.
All right. God bless.